one thing I'm kind of anticipating, like I'm anticipating like what it, maybe not my pastor specifically, but I go to my pastor and I start this estuary, and then he's like, you're bringing up a lot of stuff in there that's causing people to question their faith. There's a lot of things happening in there. Like, what's going on? Like, aren't we supposed to be bringing, uh, atheists in to hopefully, bring them into the church eventually, you know, as some kind of, evangelistic movement. So I'm just trying to figure out like, so, so there's always the part where we have like, the church has to connect with what's going on in the secular world, like science and whatever's going on with social justice, and we got to like at least figure it out, engage with it, rather than just ignore it and just close the gates, put up bigger walls, because eventually that stuff will come get you. It'll undermine you or come over the top of the walls, or it's better to engage it while it's the whole dragon story. Interact with the dragon when it's tiny and get a hold of it before it becomes this giant monster. And
same with
so,
your Rottweiler, and same with your sons.
right. Yeah, and so it's like let's engage with these ideas. And so so we got that side of it, and maybe we can reach out to people that don't that aren't Christians, and that will hope maybe end up becoming Christian because of this. But there's also the other side. There's people inside the church that need a space to think, and if there's no space to think, they leave. And so people are asking, like, why do kids go to college and then they leave the church? It's because, well, when they got space to think, there was actually no space to actually reconcile their faith and all this stuff at college, and so, like, can the estuary be this middle ground where you can allow people to, obviously it is, but like, what do you say to the pastor when all of a sudden their people are like, like, I don't know, now they're talking about Jordan Peterson more than they're talking about, the Bible. Like, what am I supposed to, I'm trying to like anticipate some of these problems that churches will have, and one answer is it's going to happen anyway. You might as well provide this space, but this is like, it almost sounds like, like, kids are going to go drink anyway. Might as well have them drink at the church.
Come on, kids. Free booze at church. Church has never been fuller.
We might as well give them a safe space to get drunk. And
yeah. I would say a couple of things.
Okay.
Let me tell you why pastors burn out. Pastors burn out because there is an implicit narrative in church work that says this: get people saved, get people to give their money and their time to church work. And the metric of success is butts and bucks and now eyeballs. That's the metric of success. And so what happens, and what has happened in church work over the last 30, 40 years with the two-income family, a whole bunch of things, the church has gotten, especially evangelical churches, have gotten increasingly professional. So increasingly churches are not unlike other kinds of corporations out there. They have HR departments, they have multi-staff, I mean, on and on and on. So churches have all of these things, and they have a mission statement. And this is, I mean, the seeker movement, basically, this was coming onto the church, and the seeker movement basically said, okay, well, we're gonna go to business school, and Bill Hybels is gonna have his leadership conference, and we're gonna read a whole bunch of business books. And yeah. I came back to North America at the tail end of this thing, and I came back to North America after being in first at seminary reading theology, and then in the mission field having nothing to read but doing all of that missiological thinking. And I come back to North America and suddenly everybody's throwing business books at me. And it's basically, your job is to grow the church. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means basically initiating people in their U-shaped journey and getting them to the bottom. And when they get to the bottom, well, okay, now you're in church. So we're going to baptize you. And then, just as you were, but now we're going to make sure that you're different, because now, unchurched Harry and Sally and, on and on and on. And pastors have crises of the soul when they begin to realize that they're simply running a religious corporation, and that what they're finally doing is using people. And whereas, in all, they have really helped improve people's lives, because when people usually, the ones who really bit in terms of their U-shaped structure were people that were already going downhill. And it was like, well, let's see, you cheated on your wife, you're drinking too much, you're, all of these things that you're spending money poorly, all of these things that churches would address. So you go to Saddleback, you have Celebrate Recovery, you have your money management program, you have your grief, you have all of these programs that address, whatever dropping they're doing right now. And here's the church at the bottom with a lot of wisdom saying, we're going to teach you how to run your life better. And they do, and their lives improve, and they tithe, and they start going to church, and they're very enthusiastic, loyal, and devoted Christian people. And all of that is wonderful. But the pastor at the middle of it begins to say, well, there's always people who aren't quite fitting the narrative. And it's like, we don't really have time for those people. And they really kind of, and there's all these little nice Christian-y sounding, these are high grace people that we need a lot of grace for them. And then once you get that label, it's like, right now I'm a problem, because, here's this Christian solution to all of my problems, and it doesn't fit me. So even Jesus and his blood wasn't effective for my mess. Right. And so pastors usually go into this profession with a heart that says, I want to help people, I want to love people, I want to care for people. And pretty quickly, they're running Costco if they're successful. If they're not successful, they're running a mom and pop store that's getting their lunch eaten by Costco. So, and so the first thing you have to say and remind pastors is, what's your job again? Let's take the law and put it down into two ideas, okay? And I don't need to do that for you if you've read your Bible. And Pastor, I hope you know your Bible to one degree. Jesus already did that, and it's love God and love your neighbor. Okay, so why don't you start there? And so let's begin, clergy, with an admonishment to love and not use people. Let's start there. And you see, part of the reason that people have, not the whole reason, part of the reason people have gotten so reactive about church, and this is very old. I mean, Gandhi had his famous quote, and people have seen it, that once you institutionalize and you framework around this institution and you have a desired outcome, which even if it's an implicit one, which for Christianity is often, we want bigger buildings, we want more people, we want more attention. Once that's your business, you've lost something in Christianity. And all of these people that fall through the cracks, well, there's always cracks and people always fall through them. But suddenly what happens is that, well, your program doesn't really work for all of these people. So, and so, okay. And I would point to your story and say, number one, the pressures on the people in your church are there. And a certain number of your people are deconstructing. The pressures and, all of this mental stuff that people don't necessarily manage the symbolism of it, but they feel it and they respond to it. This drop in youth coming back to church, that the answer to this isn't do it louder. That's not the answer. And so, pastor, these are people that Christ has called you to love. Start loving them. And well, that's, I'll be the first to admit that's a far more complex thing than, and when I say love them, I don't mean just be nice. Okay.
Right.
To be kind, but loving and nice are by no means the same thing. Okay. So you're going to have to work that out, Pastor. And the thing is, for the most part, pastors already having to do this anyway, unless they're so crass and so mercenary and so focused on some outcome that once someone is no longer useful to them, they simply drop them and no longer have time or attention for them. And
yeah.
But there's plenty of stories of that, and it's like, okay, well, then you got some things in your soul. So I think churches should do this. And what do I mean by this? I mean, again, what do I mean by this? I mean, listen to people, pay attention to people. To the degree that you have time and space in your life, try to love them or create structures of love, because that's, in my opinion, that's what the church is. Now, again, if you have a Christian framework, that love is going to have a certain shape. And that's often the grist of the conversation. But in any relationship, that's the grist of the conversation, even in a marriage relationship, because the charge usually of, you haven't been loving me well. Well, that's probably true, but let's talk about the details of that. Because if you loved me, you'd do this. Oh, okay. But now there's a lot built into that love question, because and people play those games on me all the time. Someone's sleeping in the parking lot, or they're smoking a joint right outside. Pastor, if you loved me, you'd let me keep smoking my crack pipe right outside your church. Oh, that's your definition of love. I see. I don't know that I agree with that definition of love. So we've got propositional truths to talk about. We got worldview tools to talk about. We've got worldview narratives to talk about. All that stuff is built in. But to the pastor, I'd say, what's at the core of your faith? Evangelism. Okay, wow. Well, let's talk about what that means. Let's go to the dude who you call master and listen to his words. Guess what? They're right there in your Bible. Guess what? Let's go right to the core of it. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's start there and see where we can go. Oh, you like first principles? There's our first principles. We're going to build from there. And anything in your church that in some way isn't connected with that first principle, well, maybe that should be the purpose statement towards which your organization pursues. But it's really challenging. And I get that, because there's all these trade-offs that you make, because there's always someone that says, you have failed to love me adequately. And that's probably true. And part of that is because none of us have enough time in any given day to actually love anyone adequately, nor do we even have a vision sufficient of love to see what that would mean. So yeah, I understand how this is a tough sell, but I would sit down and maybe I'll make an exception to my giving little pushes, because I'm not afraid to push pastors, because I will say, the pastor, are you running a religious service organization? Is your job to pump out material in order to create for yourself a marketplace and loyal followers? Are you basically doing what Apple does, except you do it with thought and not with plastic and aluminum electronics? Is that your business? Because if that's your business, when I look at Jesus, that didn't seem to be what he was doing. And if he is the prototype, if he is the master, if we are the disciples, then, we look at him and we follow him. And well, a lot of pastors want to sort of backtrack from there, because, well, look where he wound up. He's on a cross. and the pastors will say, well, if I do this, my board will crucify me. Well, it says a lot about your board, but it also says something about you and Jesus. So if you're not willing to be crucified, his gig probably isn't for you. But if his gig isn't for you, stop using his name. So that's what I tell pastors. So
Man,
maybe I'll make a clip of that and you can share it with your pastor.